Well, let's get started. I'm Lolly Lewis. I am the founder of Amateur Music Network, and we're just so glad to have everybody here today. Thank you so much for coming. I'm going to just give you a couple of pointers for how we're going to interact during the session, and then I'll turn it over to our guests. So the main thing is that we really encourage and would love to have questions and thoughts from you, and mostly please chat them through the chat icon. You see it at the bottom of your screen there. So you can write your chat messages and we'll be monitoring them and pass them along, probably mostly at the end of the session, but please feel free to just comment and chat, because we all feel that it's really an informal environment to be together and want to share our thoughts. So with that, I think I'm just going to turn it over to our moderator, Robert Howard, and invite him to go ahead and run the session. Hi, Robert.
Hi, and thank you to Gabriela and to Akshaya, Avril Tucker, for being here today. Both two very busy women, lots going on professionally, and then of course we all know that there's lots going on personally. Gabriela is living up in Boonville, which is a little uncomfortably close to some fires, so we really appreciate your time and your insights. I thought maybe, Gabriela, could we just, I mean, feel free, this is a little bit of a free form, but I have never understood how anybody teaches composition. And you have started this amazing academy mentoring young composers. And I wonder if you could just give me or us some insight into how you teach someone how to compose.
Yeah, well, this is a question that I think Akshaya will agree, has stymied us composers as well. And she and I have both been in lessons where we didn't get a lot out of it because we're with a brilliant musician that doesn't know how to impart how to teach composition. And I think this is similar to creative writers, how to teach creative writing. How do you teach somebody to write a good story? And whereas with performance, you can, even if you're not imaginative, you can work on scales, you can work on fingering. There's a physical object to put your fingers on to master, and there's a certain level that you can quantitatively say that you reached or not reached. But when you have something that is about something so subjective as your personal experience that you're putting into words or music or sculpture, and it can really seem difficult as to what do you do in the lesson across from somebody. And one of the analogies I've tried to use is, imagine, Rob, if you had a cellist come in for a cello lesson, and you guys each put your cello down on the table with the bow next to it, and you just look at your instruments for the next 60 minutes and you talk about what you're going to do, but you don't actually ever pick up the instrument. You don't ever actually play anything, but you just talk about it and you point and you maybe sing a few lines, but that's the lesson. That's what most composition lessons are like, is that you look at the score, but you don't actually hear the same thing, or you're even talking about the same thing, or you say, well, I think this cellist is probably going to need to go onto this string, or you might want to drop in a trumpet for more color, but you don't actually know. And everything's very theoretical. And then composers get to know 2, 3, 4 times a year when you hear something come to life. That's it for a few minutes. And you have to glean all your intel from these scant experiences. So it's not for the weak-hearted to go into this field. What can be very addictive is the first time something of yours comes to life. And in a huge rush, all of these months of wondering what this music sounds like gets addressed. And it is a really strong experience, a sensorial experience, it's an emotional experience. All your neurons in your brain are getting rewired, all these falsehoods that you've been carrying around, that something was going to sound a certain way, or even your concept of time, something that you think is going to really last a long time goes by like this. And it's not like this big moment. So one of my first theories about teaching composition is that the performer needs to be there, and we need to hear it to come to life. That's the first thing. And then it's dependent. Is it an imaginative performer? Is it a good performer? Is it a bad performer? Is it one that can give you 5 different ways of playing the same phrase, which is highly educational for us composers, is having that missing element. So with the Academy, it's really important for me to give composers that opportunity to at least get a reading of the work in progress. And so they can let go of the things that are actually not that successful, but then maybe pursue something that by accident, maybe they didn't even plan on it, but something sounds really good. And you realize, oh my goodness, I can build a piece around this. And yes, they can take credit for it, but you realize that you would have missed this wonderful window of creativity and beautiful sound. So that's the first thing. The second thing that I have borrowed a lot, and Rob, you and I benefited from people like Norman Fisher and Sergio Luca and Kenneth Goldsmith, the amazing string faculty at the school where you and I met one another at Rice University. They were so imaginative in reading a music score. The first time that I had Norman coach one of my string quartets with our schoolmates playing it, and he was reading all of this stuff into it that I kind of didn't really think about. I just put down some notes. And I thought maybe this, and he had 10 different ways that it could come to life. And I was like, oh my God, that was a brilliant composition lesson, because I could actually do that better if I had not missed what he was fleshing out of hiding. So I've learned a lot from performers. And when I talk to composers, I try to talk like a performer that has the responsibility of bringing to life this score. So I'll say, so you want me to repeat this melody again, and the only difference is that it's passionate, but you didn't write any notes different that are passionate, or it's the same dynamic. I mean, I'm trying to do what you wrote. So I'll tell the composer, I say, make it passionate, like thicken it up with some chords, let them go ka-chung over a bunch of notes, and let them climb up higher, and let it be crunchy, let it be more risky. And that's composing, but it's taking in the reality of performance. Then even things that I learned from my piano teachers about how to stay in shape as a pianist. So we do scales. They gave me certain pieces that would get me in shape so I could play a big Beethoven sonata. First, I had to play some Scarlatti and work up my way to that. We don't really teach composition with that kind of mindset that you can get into shape. We kind of start from zero and try to write a symphony. And before you write a symphony, maybe you could get better how you transition from one idea to another, something so basic as that. So if you've had the experience as a performer to play a piece where a composer has an idea, and then they have a second idea, and there's no transition between the two ideas. It's just ka-chung. And there's no like, can I just slow down? Can I like soften it? Can I take my time? Can I set the phrase or a fermata? It's just suddenly, they're into a new idea. So composers could just practice transitions for a few minutes the way that a player practice scales and arpeggios. And you could practice transitions like, I often use the example of take like a Bartok string quartet and take a Mahler symphony. And if I gave you 4 bars from the quartet, and the bars of the Mahler symphony, maybe Mahler 4, where the soprano starts coming in, could you connect the two? And that should be fun. It should be kind of funny. It should be joyous and creative. If you were to do that every day for a few months, when you actually do have a project and you need to like connect your ideas, you're going to be so in shape, it's going to go like boom, like this.
Do you spend a lot of
I teach composition by using methods from the performance world. You were going to say?
Do you spend a lot of time improvising?
That's how I got into music, was I was an improviser. And I couldn't read music very well as a kid. I had a good ear. I had perfect pitch, and I extemporized. Now, I improvise on my own. I didn't improvise with others. So I didn't learn to really listen. That's a very important part when you're improvising as a group. I didn't improvise necessarily to anybody's tempo or beat the way you might in jazz-based ensembles or with the chords laid out. I just did whatever I wanted. But that was how I got into it. And for composing, I might improvise in my head and just start with an idea and let it go, and then be able to, you learn the skill of taking an aerial view of your improvisation. So you're not just in it, you're observing at the same time. Sometimes you're more in it than you are observing, because they use actually different parts of your brain. And when you're observing, there's a third part you have to go into, which is recording. And once you record, sometimes the improv energy shuts down, and so you have to be able to be fluid and go in and out. But I don't improvise that much at the piano when I compose anymore. I mostly compose in my head now.
Interesting. Akshaya, do you have anything to add to your experience as a composer, or maybe being mentored by Gabriela or other people? Like, what's it like to take a composition lesson?
Well, it can be totally different. I think some warmth and support is really important in general. I mean, you're kind of just putting yourself out there. It can be very vulnerable. Like, I just came up with this idea. I have no idea if it's good or not. Like, that's kind of a position that I've been in a lot of the time, and being in a situation where you have some kind of like empathy towards how that feels, that means a lot to me. So that's something that I definitely got when I first, just like coming to Gabriela's program. It almost surprised me. And that should really tell you something, like how surprising that kind of like supportive environment can be. And it's not like it's all just like everything's good, everything's fun and games. Like, there is a lot of like learning that goes into that. But that was one of the biggest things for me, because Gabriela basically was able to not just say like, I think this idea should be different from her perspective or from her aesthetic, from the space she's coming from aesthetically, but like, what idea am I trying to get at? There's a way that I think the best composition teachers that I've had have been able to say, like, somehow figure out what I'm trying to say before I know what it is, rather than saying what they would say in my position. If that makes any sense at all.
It does, and I find it fascinating, not only in composing, but just, in society at large, how we can identify the good, idea in something and sort of build on it. That must be a real challenge, Gabriela.
I use almost the word immoral when I see really charismatic teachers and all their students sound like them, and come out as doctoral students or advanced students sounding like them, not freshmen. That's very normal, in your early undergrad years, is to try on different hats and sounds and techniques, and you haven't either owned those things to find your own way through these fundamentals, or you just need more time. And I have run across teachers, performers, conductors, composers, that really expected a kind of weird obedience from their students to sound like them. And I don't think that's healthy at all. And the few times I brushed up against teachers like that, whether they were chamber music coaches or compositional teachers that expected that, I was never a trash talker. I was never confrontational. What would happen was I would get very quiet and very still and not move, like I was kind of hoping you didn't notice. And I would start bringing in less music each week because I didn't want to share, just a little bit. And I would write my own thing on the side. And then suddenly it'll be programmed on a forum concert. I would just find my own friends and that's not the healthiest environment, but that was the way that I survive that, because I was never a very good imitator of something that just wasn't, authentic to a part of my path. So I think I try to, like Akshaya was saying, the environment we have here, we have a lot of strong personalities, not just in the composers, but certainly in the performer mentors. Akshaya was thrown right in the deep end. She wrote for Johnny Gendelsman, violinist with the Bochum Leiter, and Joshua Roman, the cellist. And these two, they play incredible together, but very strong personalities, and they're very direct in the criticism. And then you have me in there going, well, I think she's trying to say this. I think she's trying to say that. And then I turn to Akshaya and say, are we right or wrong? And making it really clear that it's okay to not have the right idea. The important thing is to have this discussion, you know, and then what I really loved about what Akshaya did with Breathing Sunlight that she wrote for Joshua and Johnny was that the ideas were so clear. They were so clear what she wanted, and it was exactly the kind of piece that would benefit from a reading at that point. And she touched on all the ideas that would eventually get developed, that kind of gave us a taste of things. And when she finished out the piece, it wasn't like she had written A to B and now she needed to do C to D. She went back to A and B and she retooled all of it. Everything just grew. It's like a zucchini that's just a flower, and she just let it turn into a zucchini, you know, and she just got it going. And so much so that Johnny immediately asked me afterwards and said, you know, I want to commission her. Can you help me? And I said, yeah, we just started this fund. And performers will do that when they have a wonderful, if they're part of the composing process. We realize that there's so much credit given to the composer, rightfully, but that it's just so much of a better experience when a performer is allowed to be part of that collaboration as well. So I think that's the kind of environment that we try and set up, a workshopping environment to produce a really pristine score.
Yeah, yeah. I know as a player, I've learned a lot by seeing early versions of famous pieces, like the Brahms B major piano trio, for instance. I'm thinking of Prokofiev wrote a lot of things for Rostropovich, and I have versions of one of the pieces, the concerto, before and after Rostropovich played it for him, and it's like, you know, it's the same thing you're describing. It's so interesting. It's like the same.
Yeah, and I think we're all haunted by these pristine scores that
Right.
have been worked over so much, and so we composers expect it to come out of our brain like that. And performers that are composers and maybe haven't honored that talent that they have haunt themselves, and they feel like they can't be composer because they think there's some sort of mystique to the compositional training program, when really it's just these 60 minutes, you know, once a week of sort of looking at scores and talking about composing.
So I wanted to ask both of you about that as well. In terms of notation, what are your thoughts? I mean, sometimes I know I've played some works where the notation is so overwhelming that it can feel a little bit intimidating or stifling for the performer. And then sometimes, you know, I have a set of John Cage, I don't know if you know this book, but you know, where there's some things in here that, you know, I don't know, what do you do with that? It's really cool to look at, you know.
I mean, and composers, I mean, and that's that's 2 lifetimes ago. And composers have taken the whole idea of graphic notation into new places today that have borrowed heavily from art or non-Western cultures and their ways of conveying in the written form music. And composers have shifted as to how much control they want in terms of the interpretation. So that's the advantage of working with somebody that's living.
What about
being able to have a conversation?
And for you personally, Gabriela, do you find yourself getting more specific, more flexible? Is it case by case?
Smarter. I'm getting smarter. And so I am much less micromanaging things that I used to micromanage before, realizing the performer, if they have 4 different ways of doing it, it's all good. You know, I can be loose here and be more helpful in other places, like being more specific where performers need it so that they feel confident. And there's a confidence that the performer feels when they really feel like the composer is sensitive and knowledgeable about their reality of bringing it to life. So they feel confident that the composer is giving them leeway to interpret, and they feel confident because they have the information they need for how long something is, or how much vibrato, or what is the mood of this that you're hoping for. So I've gotten smarter, and my goal is that while it would be helpful to be able to ask me questions, that you would be able to really get everything you needed if I were not involved for instance. And that's not because I don't want to be involved. I just want my scores to be that elegant and that communicative of my personality and the things that I love that performers have to bring to the table.
There must be a lot of trust involved, I'm thinking. I mean, you get a lot, you're really in demand. You're Philadelphia Orchestra composer in residence, and you've had a million premieres all over the world. And I'm sure you've showed up at the last minute maybe and been surprised by what you heard, or maybe pleasantly, maybe unpleasantly, I don't know. But your name's on the program. So how do you handle that?
You know, I'm still very surprised, always, which I love. It's a little scary. You know, I think there was part of me thinking, my goodness, it's still scary. The first rehearsal, the first time I'm going to hear anything, and I start thinking, what if it doesn't sound like this, or it doesn't sound like that, or and at the same time, I've gotten used to that fear, and I survive it each and every time. The very first time I go into that experience, it is less scary and more just thrilling, which is another side of the same coin, really. When I do chamber music as opposed to orchestral, once you start getting into the large ensemble, the necessity for time management and the amount of money and just 150 people on a stage with their own little dramas and egos and the conductor and everything else and a reviewer and my publisher and agents and blah, 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 blah. There's so much noise. There's so much noise involved that the creativity can be a very small part of the human drama that is going on. Sure. And so then I'm a little more tense and I'm a little more, you would never know from my manner. I'm really good at going in super relaxed, looking inside. My brain is going 1,000,000 miles a minute. And, in another situation, for another reason is that I'm lip reading like crazy. I'm partially deaf, and in a big ensemble, I can't hear questions as well. And so I'm really, and in a big hall, the conductor is saying, do you want it like this? Or do you want it like that? And I have to be really, on my game in order to still take in what I need to take in as a composer. Is this music happening the way that I need it? Now, in that kind of situation, while my mind is going 1,000,000 miles a minute, I'm picking my battles. I might be hearing 1,000,000 details that are off, but I can only say 3. And so I've got to pick the 3 that's perhaps a bunch of details can be taken care of if I say the right thing. For instance, the tempo is too slow. And when tempo is corrected, a lot of details can be fixed. And so that's a classic one that I just have a checklist that I just go down and I just check to make sure it's this good, it's this good. If everything's laid up, then I can really make sure that these smaller details are in place. For chamber music, I'm genuinely relaxed and I don't need to pretend anything, especially if they're old friends. Then they'll probably have seen the music, that I've taken pictures of with my phone and sent it to them for them to try out. And I'm actually really, really excited. I would usually come in with multiple versions of the same idea and ask them to play them all and then to say what's more comfortable, or I might do this, I might do that. The risk of that is sometimes performers get really invested in one way of doing something. They have a favorite, and then you don't pick it. And so you try and make it up by giving them a lot of money notes that they love later in the piece, without seeming like you're pandering. So there's a different type of human drama and customizing of the work, and I enjoy that very much. To me, it's like asking for somebody's dietary restrictions and building a really great meal around it, and having their, and having their input,
We have a couple of comments. Let's see, from David. I agree about everything about hearing it ahead. The big moment for me of discovery was sitting in orchestra rehearsal and hearing it, and the conductor playing a section and turning to me and ask, what do I think about how to render that spot? And I realized I have an answer.
That's thrilling. You may not even realize that something is going to be questioned, or there's even a question that could be asked about what you've written or what you heard. And that's what it means to be a different human being. It's a different vision. It's a different experience. I've learned so much about myself in these kinds of conversations. When I get asked questions, I'm like, yeah, what do I think about this? Or a violinist says, I could do it this way, a bunch of up bows, or I could do it with a crochet, I could do that. And I'm like listening, taking it all in. And I've gotten to the point now where I'm very comfortable with saying, I like them all. But this is what I hear with each one. Sometimes when composers say, I like it all, choose one, the performers are like, no, tell me what do you have in mind? They can lose confidence in you. So, but if you genuinely do like each one, don't pick one and just say, I like them all. This is what I'm hearing. The first one sounds aggressive to me. The second one sounds like you're leaning and are about to turn it into, you're going to pass it over to the cellist. The third one sounds like an echo of something else. And this is why. And that is a really informative answer. So you're engaging, you're giving the performer even more than what they might have, strictly asked for. I don't try to spoon feed, the performers, but I try to give them information so that they can make their own choices. So when a conductor, like what David is saying, is ask me, what do I think? I have about 15 seconds max and to tell them, this is what I'm hearing. And maestro, pick what is your interpretation, but this is what I'm hearing.
I think we're all familiar with Ned Rorem's book, Knowing When to Stop. Have you ever felt like you worked too much on something? Have you ever felt like something got worse?
No, because I felt like if something didn't work, I didn't work enough.
Okay.
It's always the opposite. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I haven't. Like, I had it perfect before. It's like reworking that dough too much and it gets really hard like a tortilla. Yeah. It's not going to rise anymore. I've done that in cooking many, many times, but I don't know, Akshaya, have you ever felt that way? Personally, I don't think I have. I always felt like I didn't put enough time into something that's not working.
I think I mean, in a way I have, but it's more about like how I'm working on it throughout the whole thing. I've had many, many projects where I've just rewritten the same thing over and over and over again. And like at a certain point, I'm like, this isn't getting better. Like I could be doing this for the next year. And that's just a really dark thought. And so something has to change in the way that I'm doing it. And usually there's some kind of like essential thing that I'm missing. Like, what is my goal? Mm-hmm. And does my goal keep on changing? Because if so, then that explains why I keep on rewriting the same thing over and over again. So like really paring it down to finding what my goal is can help.
What do you do?
It really does.
What do you both do, Akshaya and Gabriela, when you get stuck? I'm assuming you're human, and maybe you have days where just nothing's coming, or you just feel kind of tied in knots. Do you have tricks to get unstuck?
Akshaya, do you want to go first, or?
Sure. I mean, I'm currently a little bit stuck with a solo vibraphone piece that I'm working on. And it's like, I know why I'm stuck. I like have all the intellectual breakdown of like, I've seen this before. I know what happens. Like, this is how this all works. Getting unstuck will probably involve some kind, I don't know. It will involve some kind of freeing of something essential. And I think this has to do with the fact that I'm like forcing it to be done immediately. And usually music doesn't want to be done immediately. In the ways that Gabriela has talked about, like stretching your muscles every day. Like you got to like build it up slowly so that you're able to like have those skills to be able to be creative every day. So for example, trying to write an entire finished piece in one day is probably not going to work. And so there's some ways that those muscle cramps have just been like definitely getting to me.
Yeah, I think it's like what you're saying, Akshaya, is that if you are in a lifestyle of being creative, even if it's for small goals, this is a great preventative from being stuck. And, when you're stuck specifically, it's a symptom of something that's not specific. It's a general maybe anxiety, and this can also apply to stage fright, I think, where there's a general anxiety about making music. I think our version of stage fright is having writer's block. There's so much that is similar, and I've experienced both. I would experience much less stage fright if I started working on a piece that I was learning for piano early, and not be learning it at the last minute. If I was feeling good about the people in the audience, that I wasn't afraid of somebody that was going to hear this and judge me. So if I'm composing and I just don't really have fears about who's going to hear the music, I really embrace that. My music is public. And if I'm in a good rhythm of just composing, just producing and being this fertile machine, but in the best possible way of writing music. Now, when I find it helpful when I can write, if I have the luxury of writing music and I don't know which piece is going to go into. So I'm just creating, and a lot of ideas are homeless. And so then I can save all of that great material, and then I can start, I don't have to start with a blank slate of paper anymore. And this can take a little time to build up this material. And most of these ideas, I don't retire. I go back and I remember. They have a little bit of magic. There's an incomplete idea. It's like I'm on a cliffhanger. I know it's going to come next. And I get more skills. I'm more comfortable writing for strings or percussion. And I can make this idea even better now. So I've recently gone back to an idea from when I was 19 that was homeless for, decades, waiting for something, waiting for my skill sets to catch up to the idea. And that's really beautiful. It's like you're looking back at a photo album of yourself, and you can still connect with this person that looks so much younger, wearing different clothes in a different time of life. And if you can exist in that kind of relationship to your creativity, I think you're wielding a very powerful preventive mechanism towards stage fright, writer's block. Now, that can get interrupted. I got my last bout of writer's block was when Trump got elected. And I was just petrified, and have not been happy at all with how the last few years have gone. And what got me unstuck was a couple, right before you inaugurated, so between that November and then his inauguration in January, I started getting unstuck. Because I started stepping back, realizing that I was exactly that kind of person that he would want to feel cowed and silenced. So I was the daughter of a woman from a shithole country, and also a daughter of a Jew, and I was disabled. I'm a woman. I'm from Berkeley at that point was being excoriated at this cesspool of Antifa radicals. So I'm a native of Berkeley, and I'm an overeducated West Coast liberal elite. I mean, it was like all these things that were going through my head, and I was like, what? Hear me roar, and then I came off my biggest year yet. I started the Academy, and it got going, and then I wrote a huge requiem for Houston Symphony. I had a Carnegie Hall premiere with another symphony. I wrote another symphony for Detroit Symphony, my big concerto. I had a huge violin suite, solo suite. To me, that was as big as my requiem. I mean, it was just one thing after another. I was exhausted by the end of the year, but I found through breaking through that writer's block made me finally really an activist. I was casually an activist for decades, just by being. And some of the volunteer work that I did, that's just what you do if you're from Berkeley. You're just involved in that way. But evolving it, taking it to this next level, becoming an environmentalist, all of this has been recent. And it was part of not being stuck. To me, it's the same thing. It's whether it's creative or personal evolution.
That's fascinating. I mean, and because I know you, I can attest that you, I think more than most other composers I've met, have integrated all the facets of your life. You're sort of seamless, at least they appear that way to me, which is amazing. We have a couple of comments here from Lali. She says, so interesting. This reminds me of how performers approach masterworks. They think they are in some way sacred, and so they're timid about trusting their own reactions to the music. I bet with living composer, You can help the performer train to trust her instincts as a player, interpreting even the standard repertoire in a more personal and authentic way.
Yeah, I think if you have a positive experience with a composer, you will learn to trust yourself more. Now, I remember some of my early experiences working with guest composers that came to my schools that were not very nice. And it was so disappointing because like I saw their name and it was so impressive to see their scores in the library. These are very impressive things for a young person coming in. And then you meet them and they're not warm. They're not my grandpa. They're not like happy I'm getting into the field. They're not nice to the performers that are my roommates and my friends. I mean, it was really personal to me. And then I saw those performers not want to work with living composers. And, or they themselves were kind of mean to composers. I mean, there's like kicking the dog and the dog kicks the mouse or whatever that whole scenario is, you know, it's, oh my goodness. But ideally, working with a living composer lets you know that, hey, Beethoven and Brahms and these iconic composers were people. They actually were people. I'm not even sure they would be that happy with how sacred their music has gotten.
Well, so this has been on my mind a ton, especially during COVID, because I've been doing more recording than ever. And I think every musician has in some respect. There's this, how do you feel like electronics and recording and maybe even YouTube have affected your process as composers? I mean, whether it's the shorter attention span that we all deal with. I mean, would somebody like Messiaen or Mahler even like write such epic things if they were living today? I don't know.
I have a few ideas. I mean, Akshaya, what do you think? I don't want to take over here.
I don't know. I mean, my first thought is actually about notation software and I mean, just generally in the use of technology. I mean, talking about like working towards a perfect score or whatever we think a clean, like pristine, sacred score looks like. I mean, there are like notation software makes it a lot easier to make those, really clean looking scores really fast. But at the same time, like there's so much life in like writing things out by hand. And for me personally, like I find if I try to force things into that clean, like here's all the lines, here's the bar lines, like if you try to force it in too soon, the ideas like they don't want it, they're not like fully soaked. I don't know. They need to soak more and then get cleaned up, mixing analogies. But I think there's something to that in the way that we want things to be like pristine and they don't, I don't know. There's more life in some when there's a little dirt.
I mean, I've been doing a recording session this week and I have found that inevitably I'm trying to get, a live take that's of like an 8-minute movement. It's really hard to get something that seems exciting and not screw one thing up. So I don't know if you encounter this from the creative side. I mean, there's that apocryphal John Cage quote about don't create and analyze at the same time. But do you run up against that, Gabriela?
Yeah, I mean, I having sat in on some really highly professionalized and perfection-driven recording sessions of my own music, orchestral as well as chamber, where performers, your egos become really fragile because you're under a spotlight and things that you don't think are problematic in live performances that are actually valued in live performances become problematic for the sound engineer. And so that's the culture that we're coming from when we think about recording. And then we have live performances in which it's exciting and you can take risk and you expect differences. Even in tempi, but in recording, you got to keep it the same tempo. Even if you're recording the piece over multiple days, you got to go back so that the engineer can match it all. And I mean, it's just, I don't enjoy recordings for that reason, although I see their value as a product. So now we're in this hybrid situation in which we're doing home recordings with things rattling in our living room and the mics are not as good as a professional sound engineer. But but we haven't let go of our expectations that were birthed in this other environment. And I think this a younger generation, teenagers and maybe young 20-something-year-olds don't have such expectations as we do. They don't have that baggage of that kind of culture. They do record themselves, they put it out online, they make beats and, you know, found sound, and it's all kind of crunchy and a little dirty, as Akshaya was saying. It's not the kind of dirt that we're used to. We're used to dirt from our acoustic instruments and live performances. They're okay with dirt in recording mechanism. So I think we're talking about cultural shifts and generational shifts and in this hybrid environment. It's going to be interesting to see what comes out of it. We're in the mix right now. We're in these oh my God moments right now, and that said, I have always preferred recordings from live performances with the mistakes and with how the performer rebounded. I mean, there are famous recordings of Bartok playing where he's faking his own music. And I love it so much because, first of all, I feel not like a terrible pianist that I can't get everything in his music. But then I learned so much because he's doing stuff that's not in the score. And he knows this piece so well now that why should he have to do it in this, what's in the score? He probably have 5 different versions, any one of which could have gone on in the sheet. So I always felt bad for my performer friends that put such a burden on themselves to try to get this perfection. And in some of these sessions, especially with the chamber music ones, I would bow out at a conversation after a certain point. I'd be like, okay, this is a string tech thing. This is you pick whichever one you want. I'm happy with them all, but now this has gone beyond my level of perfection. You guys are more perfectionist than I am. You know, as long as you don't lose the life of it. That's my goal as a composer, is that trying to get it super perfect, they start losing the life of the piece. And I say the one magic word, and then they'll go to a more imperfect performance, but when it's better, if I just say it's starting to sound gringo, everybody's like, oh no gringo, no gringo, we don't want gringo, we want Peruvian, no gringo. Okay, all right, we can take this one a little out of tune, but okay, you know. But then we have to put in the CD booklet that we work with the composer. The composer said, you know. So everybody has this stuff that we need because we are perfectionists. You go into this and you really set high standards for yourself. So
I just wanted to interject here to what Robert said about recording. I can sit and improvise at the piano with an audience, no problem. But if I turn the tape recorder on next to my piano, then all of a sudden I can't play it again. It's like I can't. People's like, just put the recorder on, you'll get that idea. And it's like, I've never been able to do it in however many years, not well.
I completely understand. I'm just looking at the clock here, and we have, if it would be interesting, Akshaya had written a piece for me not too long ago, and I just thought it might be interesting to revisit just a little excerpt to see how it evolved, and see if we could use this as a jumping off point, maybe to comment and expand upon some of the ideas you laid out already. So Akshaya, would you like to say a tad about this? About your
Sure. Yeah, sure. So I think the plan is to play a couple different versions of this. So this is a piece that I finished last year, 2019, and that feels a lot longer ago than that. But I was working on it for probably at least 9 months before it felt done. And so part of that process was rewriting a lot of it over and over again. So I asked Robert to just kind of prepare a couple different like opening versions. So I have my 4th version of the opening, my 5th, and then my 6th, which was the final, and you know, like final in quotes. I mean, at this point. So just to like set it up a little bit, this piece is kind of it's really diving into atmosphere. So I have a big interest in Indian arts and culture. I was actually trained as a classical Indian dancer from the age of 6. And so one of the dance pieces that I learned was on this poem from the 8th to 12th centuries of East India. And it's not even specifically Hindu. There's a lot of other influences going on here from like the surrounding regions at the time. So Buddhism and Tantrism and different tribal religions. So without getting into too much detail about it, I'm trying to present an atmosphere. There isn't a narrative in this poem. It's more of like setting the stage and providing all these different contradictory visual elements that you meditate upon in order to reach this kind of essence. Just this opening stage that I'm trying to set, this opening atmosphere, I'll just read the first 2 lines of the poem just for that. So here we go. Up in tall mountain peaks, Shabari lives, decked in peacock feathers. That's it. So we have this character dressed in peacock feathers and tall mountain peaks. And so of all the ways that you could interpret that, here are 3 different versions.
Version 1 or 4 rather. And the final version. So, favorites?
Yay!
Yay! Thanks, Robert.
It's a much longer piece what did it end up about 15 minutes? Maybe?
Yep.
Yeah.
It expanded. It just like kept on growing. Yeah.
Did you have any reactions from maybe some of the people here today? Maybe you like the first one better. Maybe I did the last one better. I'm not sure. I'd be curious. Or
Well,
Gabrielle, I don't think you've heard this, have you?
Akshaya, so when you were working with Rob on these ideas, how were you absorbing it? Were you like finding things that you liked that you wanted to build on, or were you finding there were gaps or things that were not hanging together? I mean, what were some of the earliest steps as you were beginning to hear these little fires come to life?
Yeah, I think it was a mix of everything. One example is when you hear him do the pizzicato starting from low and then rising up. When I first heard that, I thought it's too like there's a dramatic shift for the scene. Like I wanted to stay in that scene longer, and I felt like the pizzicato took me out of that scene. I didn't have that much of a clear image of it today hearing it, but back when I first did, I was like, oh, okay. I was trying to really like focus in more and more and more on whatever like essence of the thing I was trying to understand or write. And it doesn't help that this is a completely esoteric poem that's very difficult to understand. So even as I was rewriting it, I wasn't just thinking what's working better for Robert, but also like what is matching the kind of essence of what I'm trying to do. And that was it's very hard to like judge that. And even hearing him play, I can hear like different versions of the piece just like spinning out from each version of what he played. It's not even that they're like better or worse at this point.
And I think what's interesting also is sometimes it takes time or distance. You wrote this piece last year, and then you when you have some distance, you have a fresh perspective and you see new possibilities. And so when you have three possible examples of three possible pieces or interpretations, and they could all go their own route, what I like to do is to exaggerate the difference and actually turn them into three different pieces, but to make sure they really stand alone as a result. So you can go back and say, where's the overlap in between everything? And I might corral all of that into one piece, or only have a little bit of overlap and then exaggerate proportionately the stuff that's different. And then once you start getting in, you start painting with those colors, and you just say, I'm gonna stay with these new ideas for at least a week before I abandon them. Then a whole new universe is gonna open up, and you can't predict this.
This is something that interests me a lot about just the creativity in general, is that for myself, I've never tried to compose, and believe me, you wouldn't want to hear it. But but just in general, if you give me more limitations, I'm actually better. If I have total carte blanche, I actually find it it's like that paradox of choice. And I'm just curious for Akshaya and Gabriela. I mean, I look at like some Bach fugues, for instance, and there's so many rules that he had to follow. Do you find yourself, have you ever gotten a commission that was overly specific, or that you felt boxed in, or maybe the inverse?
A commission, like
yeah, I mean, has anybody, I don't know, but like, do you thrive with more freedom, or do you actually do better with a few limitations?
Well, you're going to have limitations no matter what, because nobody ever says, what do you want to write? And you say, well, I'm going to write a 6-hour opera and I want a boy soprano choir. I mean, you're going to have limitations. So that's the first thing. But if you're talking about like topical limitations, like what you're writing about, and the associated skill sets then with the topical, limitations. I mean, I've been approached, for instance, by the Handel and Haydn Society a few years ago for their bicentennial. They wanted to commission an out-of-the-box composer to celebrate the fact that they are our oldest classical music organization in the country, continuously running, and that they actually commissioned Beethoven he never fulfilled it. I think he took the money but never fulfilled it. And so it's a stateside commission for Beethoven. And but they wanted me to take the Ralph Waldo Emerson Boston hymn text. And I was thinking, I wasn't familiar with it. And I looked at it and I said, oh my God, this is not a poem. This is a sermon. And it's long and it doesn't make sense. It's like a narrative. It's not like I could really just only do the first half or the second half, you know? So I was like, I felt very like this, but then I felt the responsibility of taking on something like this because of the demographic that I occupy. And then I wanted to reward them for that risk, that they didn't go with composers already comfortable writing for period instruments and writing for voices that sang in that style as well. So what I did was I went and I excerpted the best lines and I boiled it down. It's like taking really dilute broth and just boiling it down into the thick gelatinous little cup that you can just use as a scoop of like wet bouillon for future. So I just took the best lines and it actually made a beautiful poem. I didn't have to work too hard. It made a beautiful, striking poem on its own about shaking off the shackles of authoritarianism and looking into the future. And then I just got into that sound world. And what's funny is that there are all these things that I categorize as the Peruvian Gabriela, the Peruvian side of me. And they were just finding a nice, hospitable place in this piece. And it wasn't sounding Peruvian. And it taught me something about the same elements that you think put you in a certain stylistic channel. If you have the skill set, can put you in another one. So it's like, I use a lot of food analogies, but it's like if I give you all the ingredients to make sushi, I can make you a burrito out of that. I can make you a Mexican meal from it, you know, but the ingredients might point you towards Asian cuisine. And so those limitations revealed something to me. I've had others that were more emotional limitations, such as one piece that I wrote where one of the musicians wanted me to be inspired by the artwork of her father. And this was a little difficult for me. I really wanted to do this for her, and I did the piece, but I wouldn't put it as one of my most inspired works. It was a bit more functional because I just couldn't get into the artwork. And I started limiting, I wouldn't just say yes right away. That was an early experience I had, but now I have to always say, let me see if I can honor the work. Let me spend some time with it. And if not, are you okay with my picking something else? I'll always say that up front now, because that limitation was hard for me to grow from.
I can imagine as a up and coming composer, Akshaya either has the best skincare regimen or is a little bit younger than Gabriela and myself. It's hard to say no if you need work, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that must be a tricky balance to maintain.
I think it's very true. Like trying to figure out if a project will inspire you. I'm definitely saying yes to as much as I can right now. Yeah. And learning those things a little bit at a time. It's hard to tell at the very beginning whether something will be right or not. I think, it's, and then definitely with trying to just figure out like what, I think my main challenge in the past couple of years has just been like, what does my composing life look like? And then that kind of affects how many projects I'm taking on and how much I need to rely on money from each one of them. So it's like, sometimes a project that is unpaid might be more soul fulfilling, but it's like, and then I need to figure out other things around it. So like learning how to do that is tricky.
We have just a couple, I know we're kind of running out of time. We have just a couple of comments and questions. When you decide to start composing rather than perfect, when did you decide to start composing rather than perfect your performance skills? Assuming your performing skills are already perfect. I think that's for, well, either of you, ladies.
Yeah, I mean, Akshaya is also a really accomplished, not just a cellist, but also a dancer. I think that when I was a student, just by virtue of the fact that formally I was in a composition program rather than a performance program, I wasn't a performance major, although a lot of people thought I was because I played so much when I was a student.
concerto competition in University of Michigan with your
Yeah, I did.
own? How do you do that?
And I wrote my own concerto and I won, so it was a great experience for me to go through, because I had my first large ensemble experience that way. And even a little bit of being like in the limelight, the star, the one everybody's talking about, just dealing with that and the pressure, the expectation, and representing was a really good experience for me to go through at that early point. But I think I always knew that composing, I had more to offer as a composer than as a performer, and that there were fewer people doing what I was doing. And so that seemed to signal a certain kind of inclination. I have performed much less than I would like. I really miss playing desperately. But I want to play on my own terms, and I want to play when I feel prepared. I'm sometimes forget I'm not a super performer like Rob and my colleagues in the city that are really seasoned. This is what they do, so they can learn things very quick. And I forget. So we're all complaining, I got to hit this thing. Okay, yeah, first rehearsals next week. I better start looking at it. And I think I can do that in a week. And then I have gotten myself into some scrapes where I was like, oh my God, I'm not in shape anymore. I can't memorize the way I can. The connection from page to the brain to the finger is just not happening. I'm like really out of shape. So I have to be super mindful of getting back in. And so I started off, composing was a little more ahead of performing. And then in my professional life, that distance just became more and more and more great over the 20 years since I've been out of school. And it's what I'm known for. Really, it's mainly as a composer. From time to time, I do play, and it always causes a little stir, because when I practice, I do have skills, and people are like, "Well, she can really play. Let's contract her to do the Bartok concerto." And I'm like, "No, I can't. You gotta give me about 5 years to get into shape for that." So that's evolving for me, and with this pandemic. And my hope is to use this time to just play Bach for a year, because I have a lot of things I need to clean up and get my technique back. And then to figure out, I've been getting headhunted by a couple big ones, artist management companies separate from my publisher, that found some old recordings, or even an old video of my playing, and saying, are you going to do this? Are you going to pursue this? And are interested in having me possibly sign on. And my heart is squeezing a little bit in horror, because the stress of it is something that's really scaring me. So if I do something like that, it's going to have to be something where I give just a few performances a year, exactly what I want to do, with commentary, maybe, something that's more engaging than a straight up performance. I don't know if I would be able to hang with that.
We have one more from Cordy. I see that you've written for voice. Dawn Upshaw, in particular, what do you see as issues for writing for voice versus other instruments? Is writing for a specific instrument something that might be the seed that causes you to write, I guess, in inspiration? Or is it more the general sound, and then the instruments get chosen to fit the sound you want?
Well, working backwards, the last two questions are kind of related, a little separate from the vocal writing question. I do both. I'm not very discriminatory as far as where I get my ideas. Sometimes I see Rob and he just hits this one note and it's like beautiful, and the way he pauses and then he adds them, like the piece starts to build itself around that, and it has to be cello. So it's specific to the cello, and I'll build something else around. Sometimes I have a sound and I can't unpack it yet. I'm not sure what combination of instruments are feeding that sound, and I may need to work with it. Or my first inheritance of the sound is not the best version of it, if that makes sense. So I have to just work with it for a little while. And the issues with writing for voice versus that for instruments, I think Akshaya should write that, because she came to the Academy twice. And in the first one, she wrote for two really strong personalities and wrote this killer work. But it was also on instruments that she had some familiarity with. The string sound and string capability, she's really advanced, and it's really native to her. In the second project, she got a violin. We gave her that. And then I threw a mezzo-soprano. And this is a duo. It's a hard duo. One string instruments and one voice. Not even piano, nothing, nothing that we think of often with voice. And how was that for you, Akshaya?
I remember starting out by writing like a really virtuoso violin line and and coming to you and you're like, well, it should really be about the voice. Like she should be the center of this piece. And so that was a really big challenge. It's really hard to create something that's so simple and so like effective and simple. I think that's what a lot of vocal writing, coming from being a string player, I play cello. So like starting out with, we can play all these different lines at once. We can play two notes at once. We can play we can give you the illusion that we're playing three lines at the same time. And it's like, we think that something gets better when we give you more notes. But with the voice, it's opposite. Like it was a really big learning experience for me to try to figure out how to, like, what do you do with words? Like, how do you make them go with a voice? That's actually was very complicated to try to figure out. And so I ended up going with writing my own poem and then trying to set that. I think the way that it became personal for me was to take a poem that was about like the moment after my grandfather died. And so working around that, working out this very highly emotionally charged atmosphere, I was able to actually simplify a lot of the like frou-frou of extra notes and everything and just kind of find some kind of essence there.
When you're writing for something where the instrument is flesh and bone, it's not wood, it's not hair, it's nothing like that. Everything changes. And some people feel like the criticism towards singers is much more personal, is that you're actually critiquing their body, not just the instrument that they play, and that they literally have to breathe the music. I mean, the music is coming from their lungs, and there's something really deep about that. So singers sometimes get the reputation for being sensitive and emotional creatures. There are all these stereotypes that exist of like, what's a bassoon player and a flute player and the diva violin players and the silly harpist and the sensitive singers. There's all these things that we carry around. And
there's some great memes on the internet about all those.
Oh, yeah. And they're hilarious for us, and they're usually done in good affection and fun. But, and then, one of the interesting things about voice is the blend of voice is different. And the way they approach vibrato is different. So if you give like a major third for a pianist or a string player, they can get that blend really nice. You give it to two singers, the blend is going to sound different. It can even sound dissonant, like not something that's very consonant, which can be really shocking for a composer. They start feeling insecure. It's like up is down and down is up. Things like, so for us instrumentalists and pianists, a singer's range can seem very limited. So it can seem like they just have an octave and a half, and that's it? How do you build a piece from just an octave and a half? Not only that, as singers go up or they go down, when they get to the extremes of the range, there's a kind of tension that happens that they can psych you out. They can make you feel like it's not tense. They do other things, like they take a breath but an F or a G sitting in the treble clef on top of the staff is going to sound kind of intense, or a mezzo, definitely. They can hit it, but it's not going to sound like super soft the way we can do on a string or have alternatives. Now, that said, there are things that voices can do that sometimes composers overlook because we're still thinking instrumentally. We're not exploiting all the riches of vocal writing. And we're not thinking about how they can punctuate. So if they sing a certain word, if we ask them to, it's like an accent, how you do something on a bow. that you can hit it in a different way. Singers can do that. They can get out of words a certain way. Everything changes. So you learn by doing. You just learn by doing, and you learn by listening. I think art song is one of our great mediums. Just one singer and one piano, one instrumentalist, where the instrumentalist is every bit as important as the singer in telling the story. And I learned a lot by sitting in an art song classes. I didn't actually participate as a pianist. I was too intimidated as a student because the repertoire demands were huge for any pianist that went through this diet at Michigan where I did my doctorate. Martin Katz there is a legend, and he's the guy that works with the singers and pianists, and he's a pianist himself. And I remember he would say that you should play this piano part so vividly that without the singer, we know that what this is about. And that's really daunting. That's really, really daunting, but he expected that level of intelligence and detail and basically singing the line as you're playing. So if we composers can get our head around the culture of opera and art song and non-Western vocal techniques to the same level so that's commensurate with our instrumental writing, then we'll be able to do things like write an opera or write orchestral songs and art songs.
We're pretty much out of time. Thank you both so much. If you had to pick one thing to listen to, could be anything, for our group here today, what would you suggest? I'm totally putting you on the spot.
Well, I mean, what's in my player this morning, I was listening to Susana Baca, who is a Peruvian singer, inspired by Chabuca Granda. And Chabuca Granda was a composer, a woman who wrote a lot about music influenced by Avril, Peruano music, Black Peruvian music. And there's a lot out online, and she's one of the national treasures of Peru. It is beautiful music, really soulful, really rhythmic. And she was a composer and conductor, really ahead of her time in a country that, there aren't those kinds of opportunities. I would say you should check that out, talking about vocal writing. She's a master of it.
I'm totally unfamiliar with this. I look forward to, and we'll make sure to get a link out to everybody. Akshaya?
Oh boy. The first piece that comes to mind is a piece by a composer based in Southern California, Rina Esmail. She's been a big influence of mine in terms of integrating Indian music into her sound. She has a gorgeous piece, which I don't know if it's recorded and it's out there. I have like a sneaky recording of it. It's a piece she wrote for the Albany Symphony called My Sister's Voice, Meri Safi Ki Awaaz, and for a Hindustani singer and a Western soprano together with orchestra, and it's gorgeous.
This has been so interesting for me, and I hope everybody else has gotten some out of it. I certainly have. It's great to see you both. Thank you to everybody for spending this hour with us. We're gonna, speaking of art song, Nick Pon is a really accomplished tenor that is going to be doing a similar workshop in the very near future. So stay tuned for that if art song is on your list of interest. Thank you, Akshaya. Thank you, Gabriela. Stay safe up there with those fires.
Thanks, everyone.
Everybody.
Really glad you were here. Thanks, Gabriela and Akshaya. Thank you, Robert.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.